Hey, Zach.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks. Not too bad.
It's lovely to see you. And thank you so much for joining me to talk about today data and, in particular, data maturity for L&D teams.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, perfect. We've got the right person to talk to about it. What I was going to ask you, first of all, is just what do we really mean when we talk about data maturity in L&D departments?
What's interesting when you think about data maturity, it's the ability to work with data and insights. I think data is one thing, but it's really the insights that you're going to take from whatever pipeline of information is coming your way, and turn it into a situation where you can make tangible business decisions, whether that's looking at how you help your audience and your learning population, or giving the insights to your business to take relative action to progress a strategy. My role as the head of product and content within Sponge is really designing tools and strategies that help businesses do just that. So the one thing I'd always say about data maturity, though, is it's really, really important to understand that, L&D is a function. It's an organization within a business. The wider business might have varying levels of data maturity that differ from that team. So it's about how do we help them articulate, what they're seeing from an insight point of view to match the language of the organization that they service and support, I would say.
So you touched on something really interesting there because what we've seen kind of historically is that departments like marketing and sales often have very kind of comprehensive, mature sort of data maturity, but actually L&D may have been a little bit left behind. What kind of data maturity models are you using to assess where L&D may be in their journey?
Well, it's important to understand that it's a journey, right? And that businesses will be at varying different stages. So we like to use like a 4-step model on, data maturity. That's literally what it's called, the 4 stages of data maturity. And it really kind of starts with being data aware. And really what that means is how is your data actually being captured? Is it manually compiled, or is it actually something that you have access to in order to make decisions? We then move on to data proficiency and then data savviness, ultimately to get to a stage where we get to being data driven. And that is really your organization will be in a situation where they use data to make decisions. So they have a process and a ritual of almost how they capture information coming in. They then use those insights to then just make strategic or tactical decisions depending on whatever's required from them. I whipped through the proficiency and savvy piece, but if you actually look at those stages of the model as well, proficiency is where you're becoming a bit more sophisticated with your data, and you're actually starting to standardize how you're actually going to use it. You look at a lot of technologies and platforms that are set up in learning tech. They help you capture the data and then turn it into some visualization that allows you then to potentially report back onto it. So that's a great example of data awareness to data proficiency working. Where we really want to get to is to move to a situation where we can help organizations become data savvy, which is where they actually use these decisions based on the data and insights that's coming their way to make meaningful choices. Does this mean that we continue to drive a learning initiative forward, or is this something where we take a step back and we think this actually isn't, there's no fruit in this activity. We have to change our tactic altogether. So we really, like I said, we really try to cater to organizations that are between that awareness and savvy stage. I think once you actually have that down, and that's quite a hard thing to do, but once you actually have that flow in the maturity process or model, being data driven becomes a lot easier because it's almost a cultural norm onto the back of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So to summarize then, that you see people kind of starting out at sort of data aware, then moving towards data proficiency, then becoming more data savvy, and then becoming more data driven, where really organizations or departments and functions are, if there's no data, there's no decision. It's kind of really the thing that underpins it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in your work then, tell me where you see many of the clients that you're collaborating with.
A lot of the clients that we're working with actually started to ask themselves the question, where am I on the maturity model?
Right.
And it's a really interesting activity when you actually go through it, where would they plot themselves? Where would their stakeholders plot them? Where does the actual people that they service plot them onto the back of it? Are they seeing tangible improvements, for example? And that's a really powerful question to explore with an organization, and we try to do that collaboratively with them, where helping them gauge where they are in that maturity scale, then also allows us to then start articulating the data to prove that they're where they think they are. And that's often its own challenge, but then also helping to create a strategy for them to continue to scale that up. I mean, I'd be surprised, most businesses are probably data proficient due to the technology that they're using. And, going back to an earlier point, you talked about marketing as an example where they're a bit ahead of L&D functions. The amount of tools that are out there to create that data savviness, right? That data maturity are significant from a marketing space. Google Analytics is a great one, right? You can start articulating that into behavior and there's use cases. Over the next couple of years, we will see more and more of those use cases move into the L&D space, and that's where it gets really interesting. So I would see that most organizations are probably in the data proficiency stage, looking to become savvy, looking to be in a situation where they can start to make predictions, start working with their stakeholders to flip the script. And especially in a compliance space, for example, you might see, our population are passing fire safety with an 80% pass rate. The actual truth is you have 20% risk there potentially, right? There's 20% of that known content that they need to get right that they're not getting right. But they might meet a minimum threshold. There's still some potential impact that can happen on the back of that. So helping businesses start to articulate, what does this actually mean? What are the trends? What's the actual insights that's coming through with all the data that they're capturing? Because that's fantastic when you actually look at the amount of information that's pipelined in to an L&D team to really make these decisions.
So if they're kind of data proficient and the next step is data savvy, what would you kind of be recommending, on a real practical level, steps that these kinds of organizations or departments can take to kind of move them forward in that direction?
I think a part of it is what's the appetite within the organization to be data driven. That's maturity, I guess, culturally, a cultural maturity level that needs to be achieved, right? And if they're even at the situation where they would consider themselves to be data savvy, you'd be surprised where, you think about organizations, how many of them actually fit into the data awareness category that think they're in the actual savvy piece. It's really, so when you start thinking about the steps, when you're going to that data driven piece, it really starts becoming about how things are embedded into your actual organization, right? What's the culture? What is your accessibility to your stakeholders? So it's really about creating the culture for insights to then lead to decisions and to impact processes. So it's quite a unique process to be in, or I guess a unique position to be in with an organization. And I find that there's not one size fits all for organizations that are at that stage, if that makes sense.
So would you be looking for things like kind of standardization of data so that people can make kind of comparable analyses, kind of year on year or program to program, or where does that sort of data rigor and display kind of fit into that?
Well, it's an interesting one because I would put that back further into the data proficient and data aware stages, right?
Okay.
So the pipeline of information is coming in, it's standardized in a way that's articulable, that you can articulate, and that you can measure and actually start using for trend analysis. So that's actually at the very beginning of that model. And like I said, I'm feeling that businesses are between proficient and savvy, those are the ones that I'm working with. I think if you actually go and start actually working with wider organizations, actually asking them to prove where they are in the maturity model, it's actually really quite interesting how much people still need to do at the very beginning of that process as well. And that's why that model is such an important tool to use.
Brilliant. Great. And so what about other questions L&D teams might be asking if they want to move themselves more towards this kind of data savvy place? What else could they be doing?
What is the data that really makes the biggest difference in terms of what they're trying to achieve? Think about your learning goals. Think about the objectives that you're working towards, not only within your own team, but within your organization, right? What are some of the things that you're able to then potentially track that are realistic, and that have tangible options onto the back of them? So, for example, most learning initiatives have an objective of some sort that they're trying to achieve. Asking yourselves, how do we capture that data? How will we know that this is actually data that will help us hit our points of success versus, we might need to make a pivot here because we're not getting the expected insights that we would have thought we would have got when we launched this initiative initially. So really thinking about what you're trying to achieve up front is key. The maturity model doesn't mean anything if you don't have goals that you're working towards, right? Because you need to be able to benchmark it against something.
Amazing. Okay, that's really helpful. And I'm trying to get a sense of this all in context. So is there an example you could share with us that kind of puts all this in a real world kind of client scenario, somebody maybe that you've been working with?
Yes, absolutely. So there's an organization that I work with where compliance is basically the core output of their, I guess, their learning organization. They're a retail chain that specializes in hotels, and they're very audited. So, they need to make sure that people have done the training when they should have done it. Some people need to do it before they even start certain roles within the organization. So, and they need quite a detailed footprint that they can access at any time. And really, when you start thinking about the context, it's not about ticking a box. It's actually about putting people in a situation where you can save lives. One incident, for example, somebody's working by themselves. If they don't know what to do in that situation, it can be disastrous, not only for themselves, but everyone else in the building that they work with or that they're servicing. So I guess working with this organization, really helping them understand, that they can do so much more with their data than just the completion metrics. They can do so much more than just saying these people have done this by this time. We've got a snapshot that we can access in real time that knows where our weaknesses are for just that metric. Is what are they actually trying to do? The goal is they're trying to make their environment safer, right? They're trying to make their people motivated to kind of improve, I guess, the standards that they want to deliver to their customer base as well. So really starting to get them to start to think about, with all the information that they're using, the opportunity of what they're building, and a lot of it's through digital modules, so e-learning modules. How can we set benchmarks in place that really tells them that they're going into the right direction? A manager can see this at any point, or an area manager can see this, or even the head of an entire business unit can see, at a moment's notice where their strengths and weaknesses are along those lines. So if we were able to potentially even experiment to do something this way in our content, would we see an improvement in cases where people aren't getting hurt at work or incidents being raised and reported? Are we going to see that theoretical 20% that I mentioned whittle down to 8%? So there's getting the business to start thinking in that context, and then getting to a state where they can start making predictions off the back of it. We saw certain areas where there was populations of people that were not completing things in a certain time frame, for example. When you actually look at the incidents that are behind that, and I'm trying to be really generic here, so bear with me as I'm being vague. There was some really key points that started to point to that, the training was quite dense, it was quite heavy, right? So, and there was no interaction for the user. The user can just click right through it, right? So, by helping them break that down and actually separating that into its own piece, you can challenge these, and it doesn't have to be done right away. So helping them work through that really was a key example.
What about any kind of, I know you mentioned before that example feels like someone who's perhaps at a kind of more data aware stage, moving maybe towards data proficiency, would you say, or were they moving from a sort of proficient position to a savvy position? It's actually
interesting. So there's going to be more data analysts on their training team than there will be training managers.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So that's a really interesting position for them to be in. And once again, it's not just about the L&D function as a part of the HR function, right?
Yeah.
And the people function. So there's a whole journey that they need to go through to bring that entire unit and that maturity level up to scratch in terms of, here are the insights, here's what we can recommend. How are we going to work with our stakeholders now on the back of that?
Are they using any technologies that you've put in place, like dashboards or anything like that, that's helping facilitate and speed up their ability to pull those insights from the data that they have?
Yeah, so they're using our Spark learning management system.
Okay.
It's got quite a few detailed visualizations, not only in the compliance space, with compliance rules, so you can actually set measurements that you want to track, but they're also looking at some of our standard visualizations that really do focus on user behavior against mediums of time. So if somebody or an area is taking significantly longer or shorter than the expected average, they're able to kind of act on that there and then, and to start digging deeper to kind of interrogate their content.
Well, that's really super. And it feels like data is still really being talked about. It's still a hot topic. And I just, you're going to want to carry on speaking to lots of different clients and having these conversations. And I hope that your work in this space carries on and you get to work with more clients and move them further through the maturity cycle. If there was one thing we could take away from this call with regards to data maturity, what do you think would be the most helpful thing for L&D teams to do as a result?
Look what's going on. We're going through a bit of a real evolution in the L&D space. The amount, I think back to when I was starting out in L&D about 15, 16 years ago, data really was completion or not completion,
Right.
So there's a whole community where people are talking about how they can leverage data. It doesn't have to just be in L&D. You can look into wider, the tech space is great in terms of how they're using data with their customer bases. But really have a look, speak to the people that you have, and come and speak to us. I know that's a plug, but maybe think about it. This is an area that we're specializing and we're committing to as one of our key strategic pillars going forward. So the amount of organizations that I've spoken to that are clients and that are prospective clients, the appetite is just fantastic when you start getting into what data could mean for them and how it can really solve problems. And I'm talking about data going into insights, and it's quite a powerful position. But yeah, the first thing I always recommend anybody who wants to go down that road is really just look at what's out there, gravitate around, key questions. Where are we in terms of maturity? Where do we want to be? What's achievable this year versus, 3 years into the future, and that's where an organization like us can really help them.
Super. Well, it sounds like you're very excited and animated about it, Zach. You've been brilliant to talk to. Thank you very much. And I'll see you again soon.
Look forward to it. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.